the jihadist groups are gaining in momentum, and Wagner, the Russian mercenary company that the Malian government brought in, and whose arrival was one of the reasons that the French and other European forces have quit, don't really have the same military capabilities. You know, there are probably 1,000 Wagner men. They don't have the sort of air power that the French have. They don't have the sort of elite commandos that the other European Union countries were contributing. And they have a pretty dreadful human rights record in various theaters, for example, the Central African Republic. And so there have been accusations in Mali that they've been involved in incidents where the Malian army and Wagner men have killed villagers. In the village of Moura, there are claims that up to 300 people were killed.
We talked about the reasons for the French leaving Mali and other Francophone West African countries and the arrival of the Wagner Group. But now these jihadists, they seem to have been emboldened.
They have been emboldened. I think they want to send a strong message because the Malian government has allowed itself to focus almost overmuch, if you like, on its nationalist political battle with France. There's been a lot of talk of, French neocolonialism. When the last French troops pulled out, just as they were leaving, a sort of local demonstration was organized on a pretty small scale, but all the same in Gao, the town that they were quitting, just to sort of fiercely wave them goodbye, if you like. And while the government's been focused on all of that, it's lost sight of the bigger picture, which is that there is huge instability across the center and the north of Mali. The jihadist groups are gaining in momentum, and Wagner, the Russian mercenary company that the Malian government brought in, and whose arrival was one of the reasons that the French and other European forces have quit, don't really have the same military capabilities. There are probably 1,000 Wagner men. They don't have the sort of air power that the French have. They don't have the sort of elite commandos that the other European Union countries were contributing. And they have a pretty dreadful human rights record in various theaters, for example, the Central African Republic. And so there have been accusations in Mali that they've been involved in incidents where the Malian army and Wagner men have killed villagers. In the village of Moura, there are claims that up to 300 people were killed.
I mean, this is truly horrific, Paul. And it's important to say that the government in Bamako, the government of Mali, are not a constitutionally elected or democratically elected government. They are a military government. Why would they prefer to have the Wagner Group, which is believed to be close to the Russian government, to the French? Why would they rather have them there than the French troops?
I think it's because the democratically elected government that was overthrown in August 2020, although it had many flaws, it wasn't very, very efficient, but it was democratically legitimate. But it had a long-standing partnership with the French, with the other Europeans, with the United Nations peacekeeping force, which, for example, includes even now some British soldiers. So it was tied into what you might call the sort of standard international alliances. And as a kickback against that, there was a sort of wave of nationalistic feeling, particularly in sort of street politics in Bamako, the capital of Mali, around that first coup. And then when the first civilian government that the soldiers installed essentially rebought into that consensus, the soldiers staged another coup last year, and this time really reasserting, if you like, a very strong nationalist line. And at a time when the Mali economy, well, like economies all over the world, but of course you feel the pain more in a very poor country like Mali, is under huge strain, the government, in a sense, appears to be trying to mobilize domestic support or sustain domestic support by stirring up anti-foreigner feelings and portraying, if you like, Wagner as trusted Russian allies. The government refuses to confirm that Wagner are there, even though all the independent intelligence sources, all the independent observers, and human rights groups say that Wagner is present.
And briefly, Paul, if as a result of the French departure and Wagner's inability to control the jihadists, there are more terrorist attacks, you can imagine what's going to happen. Local people will get very, very angry with the military government, who may at some point be begging the French to come back.
Well, there is already quite a lot of pressure on the military government because a lot of the conventional politicians in Mali have been opposed to it. And at the start, it was easy for the military and those associated with them to sort of portray this as, if you like, the middle class urban political elite. But as things get more difficult, that's harder to sustain.
Yeah.
And also a very, very influential Muslim cleric in Bamako, Imam Diko, Mahmoud Diko, he has become a major critic of this government as well. So they're now under quite a lot of pressure. And there have been terrorist attacks quite close to the city, which is pretty much unprecedented before. I mean, there have been urban terrorist attacks in Bamako, but attacks on checkpoints, attacks on rural locations not very far from the capital city, that's something that could begin to unnerve a lot of people, because people have family in the countryside. If they can't get in touch with them, if villages are isolated, that undermines the sort of basic social base, if you like, of the government.